Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping on our virtual helmets and peering into the catastrophic history of 79 AD. We're focusing on the shadow of Mount Vesuvius.
It's such a famous event, isn't it? The disaster that really defined our picture of Roman life. But for you, the listener, we want to drill down into a fascinating paradox.
A paradox.
Yeah, the mountain simultaneously destroyed two cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum, yet it preserved them in, well, completely opposite ways. It's quite remarkable when you look closely.
Right. Everyone knows Pompeii. I mean, it's the big one, the vast city, frozen solid, famous all over the world for those haunting plaster casts of people.
Exactly.
But we're doing a deep dive into its neighbor, Herculaneum. It was smaller, definitely wealthier, and maybe far more mysterious. We really want to understand the physics of destruction.
That's precisely our mission today. To explain why the fate of these two cities wasn't just terrible luck, but a result of very specific scientific factors. Things like wind direction, heat intensity, the type of volcanic material, and crucially, timing.
Okay, so we need to figure out what exactly led to Pompeii giving us those empty spaces, the voids that became the casts.
While Herculaneum, on the other hand, gave us perfectly preserved organic material. We're talking actual wood, food, fabrics, and even, incredibly, the only surviving library from the ancient Roman world. How did that happen?
Let's get into it. To really understand the differences in how they were destroyed, maybe we first need a snapshot of who they were before the eruption. What was life like? Let's start with Pompeii, the big city.
Right, Pompeii was definitely the powerhouse, the economic engine of the region. A pretty sprawling place, covering all 67 hectares. Population estimates vary a lot, but maybe, 10,000, possibly even up to 20,000 residents.
So a significant city for its time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A major commercial hub. Pompeii was vital for trade, exporting huge quantities of local products like wine and olive oil across the Mediterranean, maybe even further.
And wasn't it also a city sort of rebuilding?
Yes, that's a really important point. They'd suffered a massive earthquake back in AD 62, quite devastating.
Yeah.
So right up until Vesuvius erupted 17 years later, they were actually in the middle of major reconstruction.
Okay.
Yeah, actively rebuilding and modernizing public buildings. We see evidence of impressive improvements to the Forum, the heart of the city, and construction work on new facilities like the central baths. So it's a dynamic place, recovering and evolving.
Okay, now let's shift focus. Turn our gaze just, 15 miles or so northwest to Herculaneum. You said smaller, wealthier.
Significantly smaller, yes.
Yeah.
Population estimates are maybe around 5,000. But crucially, it seems to have been a markedly wealthier town per capita. Think of it as less industrial, more residential.
Like a resort town, almost.
Exactly. Almost like the Roman equivalent of an exclusive high-end beach community today.
Yeah.
The architecture really tells that story. You don't find the same density of shops or workshops as in Pompeii. Instead, you find these incredibly luxurious private houses, villas really, like the House of the Alcove or the House of Aristides, built right down towards the sea. They feature lavish decoration, extensive use of colorful marble cladding, intricate mosaics, really expensive materials.
So definitely a place for the Roman elite.
It certainly seems that way. A seaside retreat. And there's even a traditional tale, likely a legend, linking its founding to the Greek hero Heracles, or Hercules to the Romans. It adds to that sort of prestigious, almost mythical aura.
Fascinating contrast. One, a bustling trade city rebuilding, the other, a wealthy coastal hideaway.
Precisely. And that difference in character is going to be reflected in how they face the eruption.
Okay, let's talk about the eruption itself. Because before we even get to the mechanics of the blast, you mentioned something that changes the whole picture. About the date.
Yes, this is fundamental. For, well, almost 2 millennia, the accepted wisdom, based on a surviving letter copy, was that the eruption happened in August of 79 AD. August 24th, usually.
Right, I think that's what most people still learn.
Probably. But modern archaeological consensus, based on a huge amount of evidence gathered on the ground, now places the date significantly later, on or more likely after October 17th. Some evidence, like a charcoal inscription found recently, even points possibly to October 24th.
Wow, October, that's a big shift, a whole different season. What kind of evidence could possibly push such a well-known historical date forward by 2 months?
It's actually quite compelling when you add it all up. First, the human remains. When forensic anthropologists studied the victims, they found many were wearing heavier clothing, thicker woolen tunics, cloaks, than you'd really expect for a sweltering Italian August heat wave.
Okay, that makes sense. More like autumn wear.
Exactly. Then there's the food. The foodstuffs found preserved in shops and homes are typical of late autumn, not summer. things like pomegranates, nuts, olives. Critically, summer fruits like figs and plums were found already dried or conserved, suggesting the fresh harvest was over.
Ah, I see. The state of the food tells you the season.
Precisely. And there's more. Fresh produce being sold was typical of October harvests. Also, the large clay jars used for fermenting wine, the dolia, had been sealed up. That was a task usually completed only towards the end of October, after the grape harvest and initial fermentation.
So, multiple lines of evidence all pointing away from August and towards late October.
Yes. The victims were dressed for autumn, the food available was autumnal, and agricultural cycles point to late October. It really changes our mental image of those final days.
It does. Cooler weather, maybe different activities happening. Okay, so late October, 79 AD. The mountain finally blows. How did geography and, crucially, the wind dictate who got hit first and how?
Absolutely critical factors. Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the eruption from a distance and wrote letters about it, described the initial phase. A massive eruptive column shaped like a pine tree, shooting miles into the sky, carrying tons of ash and pumice.
The iconic image.
The iconic image, yeah. Now, the prevailing winds on that first day were blowing strongly towards the southeast, and Pompeii lies southeast of Vesuvius.
Ah, so Pompeii was directly in the path of that initial fallout.
Directly in the path. It received the bulk of that first phase. For about 18 hours or so, Pompeii was subjected to a relentless rain of ash and lightweight pumice stones. Some quite large, apparently.
18 hours of that. Sounds terrifying and deadly.
Terrifying, definitely. It caused roofs to collapse under the weight. But in a way, it was almost a mixed blessing. That pumice fall buried the city relatively slowly, under maybe 4 to 6 meters, about 13 to 20 feet of material.
Slowly being the key word there.
Exactly.
Right.
That time lag, those 18 hours of falling debris, crucially allowed the majority of Pompeii's population time to escape, to flee the city before the truly lethal phase arrived.
Okay, so many got out, but not everyone. What happened to those who remained?
Those who stayed behind, perhaps trapped in buildings or hoping to wait it out, were later caught by the next phase, the pyroclastic flows. These are fast-moving currents of superheated gas and volcanic debris. But the flows that eventually reached Pompeii, having traveled further, were somewhat less dense and had cooled slightly. Still incredibly hot, mind you, around 250 degrees Celsius, or 480 Fahrenheit. Hot enough to kill instantly, but different from what Herculaneum faced.
Right. Let's contrast that with Herculaneum then. It's west of Vesuvius, so the initial wind saved it from that pumice rain.
Initially, yes. Being upwind, Herculaneum only received a very light dusting of ash in the first 18 hours. Not enough to cause major damage. This might have given residents a false sense of security, or perhaps more likely prompted many to evacuate relatively calmly, heading towards Naples, perhaps.
But their luck ran out.
Dramatically. The fatal blow came later, in the early hours of the next morning, maybe around 1 a.m. The massive eruption column, unstable, finally collapsed under its own weight.
And that triggered the pyroclastic flows.
Exactly. It sent multiple, devastating pyroclastic surges racing down the volcano's western flank, directly towards Herculaneum. These weren't like the ones that reached Pompeii later. These were faster, denser, and hotter.
How fast and how hot are we talking?
Estimates suggest speeds of up to 160 kilometers per hour, that's 100 miles per hour, and the temperature was much higher, probably around 500 degrees Celsius, nearly 930 Fahrenheit. A succession of at least 6 of these surges hit the town.
6 waves of that. Unimaginable.
Utterly devastating. These surges didn't just deposit material, they slammed into the town, instantly incinerating everything flammable and burying Herculaneum completely. And much deeper than Pompeii.
How deep?
Under approximately 20 meters, that's over 65 feet of solidified volcanic material. Not soft ash and pumice like Pompeii, but a dense rock-like deposit formed as mud ash fused together. That depth and that material type are the absolute key to understand the different kinds of preservation we find.
Okay, that difference is stark. Pompeii buried under 4 to 6 meters of relatively soft ash and pumice. Herculaneum under 20 meters of rock-hard solidified flow. Let's dig into how that affected what survived. Pompeii first, the famous voids.
Right, the voids are fascinating. Because Pompeii was covered relatively quickly, but by finer, porous ash and pumice, this material packed tightly around objects and people. It hardened, creating a perfect mold.
A mold of everything.
Everything. Bodies, wooden furniture, doors, shutters. As the organic material inside the flesh, the wood decomposed over the centuries, it left behind a hollow space, an empty cavity, perfectly preserving the shape of what had been there. the void.
So it's literally an empty space that happens to be shaped like a person or a table.
Exactly. And the genius insight came much later, during systematic excavations in the 1860s. The archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli realized what these cavities were. He pioneered the technique of carefully drilling a small hole into the void and pouring in liquid plaster.
Ah, filling the mold.
Precisely. Once the plaster set, the surrounding hardened ash could be chipped away, revealing a perfect plaster cast to the victim, capturing their final posture, the folds of their clothes, sometimes even their facial expressions at the moment of death. It's incredibly powerful. Pompeii essentially captured the absence, the shape left by life.
It really is. Haunting is the right word. Okay, now Herculaneum. Buried deeper, hotter, faster. How did that lead to preserving wood and scrolls?
It's the intensity and speed of the heat from those pyroclastic surges. Instead of gradual burial allowing for slow decay inside a mold, the organic materials in Herculaneum were hit by that intense 500 degrees C heat wave almost instantly.
So they didn't decompose.
There wasn't time. They didn't rot, they carbonized. The intense heat rapidly vaporized the water in the organic material and turned the object essentially into charcoal, preserving its structure.
Like burning wood in a kiln almost.
Sort of, yes, but sealed instantly by the pyroclastic material packing around it. So we find carbonized wood everywhere. Roof beams, staircases, doors, window shutters, even furniture like beds and tables. We find carbonized food, loaves of bread, nuts, grains, even textiles, incredibly rare survivals.
And the scrolls, the library.
The famous papyrus scrolls from the Villa of the Papyri are the ultimate example. Hundreds of scrolls, tightly rolled, were carbonized in the same way, preserving texts that would otherwise be completely lost. It's phenomenal.
It really is. But you mentioned the excavation challenges. Herculaneum was found first, but harder to dig.
Yes, ironically, Herculaneum was stumbled upon first, way back in 1709, during the digging of a well. But imagine trying to excavate through 20 meters, 65 feet of solid rock. Early exploration was done by tunneling, essentially mining into the ruins. Incredibly slow, difficult, and dangerous work.
Right, not like just clearing away ash.
Not at all. Pompeii, rediscovered later in 1748, was much easier. Only 4 to 6 meters of relatively loose ash and pumice. You could do open-air excavations relatively quickly. That's a big reason why Pompeii became far more famous for centuries. It was simply more accessible.
That makes sense. Now let's talk about the people, the human cost. You mentioned the skeletons found at Herculaneum. That changed the story, didn't it?
Absolutely. For a long time, because initial explorations found relatively few bodies within the main town area of Herculaneum, the prevailing theory was that most residents had successfully escaped before the pyroclastic flows hit.
Which seemed plausible given the initial light ash fall.
Exactly. But that narrative was completely overturned in the 1980s. Excavations focused on the area of the ancient beach, down by the waterfront, and there, huddled inside arched stone vaults, probably used as boathouses or storage, they found them.
How many?
Over 300 skeletons, men, women, children, packed together, clearly seeking shelter from the eruption, waiting perhaps for rescue by sea. It was a shocking and poignant discovery.
And the state of those skeletons told a different story about the heat compared to Pompeii's victims.
A brutally different story. This is where the temperature difference becomes critically important for understanding the remains. In Pompeii, the 250 degrees C heat was enough to cause death, often by thermal shock or suffocation from the ash and gases, but it allowed the flesh to decompose later, leaving the voids for Fiorelli's casts.
Okay.
In Herculaneum, that estimated 500 degrees C heat from the pyroclastic surge caused something else entirely: instant death due to fulminant shock. The thermal energy was so intense and hit so quickly that soft tissues were essentially vaporized almost instantly.
Vaporized.
Yes. And the extreme heat caused violent muscle contractions, leading to the characteristic clenched hands and feet often seen in the skeletons. It was so intense it could even cause skulls to explode and bones to fracture post-mortem. That's why Herculaneum yielded actual fully preserved skeletons. The heat didn't allow time for voids to form. It incinerated the soft tissue immediately, leaving the mineral structure, the bones, intact but thermally altered.
That is incredibly grim, but scientifically fascinating. It explains why we have casts from one site and skeletons from the other.
Precisely. 2 different thermal pathways leading to 2 distinct forms of preservation of the human tragedy.
But those skeletons, horrific as their end was, now offer incredible insights, don't they, through modern science?
Immense insights. We can learn things Fiorelli could only dream of. For instance, recent chemical analysis, I think it was published in 2021, looked at the trace elements in the bones of the Herculaneum victims.
And what did they find?
Clear differences in diet between the sexes. Men, on average, seem to consume about 1.6 times more fish and seafood than women.
Interesting. Why would that be?
Well, it might reflect different occupations or access to certain foods.
Mm.
Perhaps men were more involved in maritime activities, or maybe higher status males had preferential access to expensive seafood. Women, on the other hand, showed evidence of consuming relatively more terrestrial animal products, meat, eggs, dairy, and also more fruits and vegetables.
So we're getting a detailed picture of Roman diet, broken down by gender, from people who died almost 2,000 years ago.
Exactly. It's that specific. They even identified one skeleton, number 26, found on the beach, as likely being a soldier, possibly a Praetorian guard based on his equipment found nearby. The thinking is he might have been part of Pliny the Elder's attempted rescue mission that sadly failed. It puts a potential face and story to one individual caught in that terror.
Incredible detail. Okay, let's move forward in time. Archaeology isn't just about the past. It's happening right now at these sites, isn't it? Especially in Pompeii.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very active field. While much of Pompeii was excavated in the past, there were still significant areas, particularly in the northern part known as Reggio V, that remained largely untouched, buried under the original eruption layers.
And recent work there has yielded some spectacular finds.
Truly spectacular. It's constantly reminding us how much more there is to learn. One of the most famous recent discoveries is the Thermopolium of Reggio V.
The snack bar.
Basically, yeah. An incredibly well-preserved street-side food counter, brightly decorated with frescoes of animals that were likely on the menu. And the amazing thing was, archaeologists found earthenware pots, the dolia, still containing remnants of the food being served on the final day.
Like what? What were Romans grabbing for lunch back then?
They identified traces of duck, goat, pork, fish, even land snails. It's like the cooks just walked away mid-preparation, an unparalleled snapshot of daily food culture.
That's amazing. And other big finds, too. I remember hearing about a chariot.
Yes, just outside the city walls, in a villa at Civita Juliana, they unearthed an almost perfectly preserved ceremonial chariot, a polentum. It's incredibly ornate, with bronze and tin decorations, likely used for parades or maybe weddings. It was found in a portico near the remains of horses, ready perhaps for an escape attempt that never happened.
And the art, are we still finding new frescoes?
Constantly. Recent digs in Reggio V have uncovered houses with stunning, vibrant frescoes that look almost freshly painted. Dining rooms with mythological scenes, Helen of Troy meeting Paris, Apollo pursuing Cassandra. Even a beautiful small shrine, a lorarium, decorated in a rare, rich blue color. The quality and preservation are just breathtaking.
It sounds like a golden age of discovery, but there's a flip side, isn't there? The conservation challenge.
A massive flip side. It's the huge, ongoing crisis for both sites. Once excavated and exposed to the elements rain, sun, wind, pollution, tourism, the buildings and artifacts start to decay, often rapidly.
So uncovering things can actually endanger them.
It's the paradox of excavation. Add to that problems like water damage from poor drainage, the sheer pressure of millions of tourists visiting each year, vegetation growth, and sadly, decades of past neglect and mismanagement. It's a constant battle.
I remember the collapse of that building in Pompeii a few years ago.
Yes, the Scuola Armatorum, the House of the Gladiators, in 2010. It was a wake-up call, highlighting just how fragile the site was. There have been other collapses too. Herculaneum faces similar pressures, maybe even more complex given the deep excavation and water table issues.
So what's the approach now? Is it less about digging, more about protecting?
Exactly. There's been a significant shift in strategy in recent years. The focus now is much more on conservation, preservation, and stabilization of what has already been excavated. Major international efforts like the Herculaneum Conservation Project, largely privately funded initially, and the EU-funded Grande Progetto Pompeii, Great Pompeii Project, are tackling these issues head-on.
What kind of work does that involve?
It's everything from repairing ancient plumbing and drainage systems to stop water ingress, to stabilizing walls and structures, restoring frescoes using advanced techniques, managing visitor flow better, using technology for monitoring and extensive documentation. It's about ensuring these incredible sites survive for future generations, not just digging up more before we can care for what we have. It's a race against time, really.
A crucial shift. Okay, let's try and pull this all together. If we look back at our core comparison, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Same volcano, same day, vastly different outcomes.
That's the essence of it. Pompeii, buried relatively slowly under cooler ash and pumice, essentially throws life in place. It gave us those dramatic final postures, captured by the voids in Fiorelli's plaster casts. It's the archaeology of absence, in a way.
Herculaneum.
Herculaneum, hit by hotter, faster pyroclastic surges and buried deep under solidified rock, underwent instant carbonization. It didn't preserve the moment of death in the same way, but it preserved the physical materials of life itself. The wood, the food, the textiles, the scrolls, the actual stuff of the Roman world.
Two sides of the same catastrophic coin, yielding different kinds of invaluable knowledge.
Absolutely. Together, they give us an unparalleled window into the Roman world, from the grand scale of urban planning and elite architecture in Herculaneum to the detailed social fabric and everyday commerce of Pompeii. And now, even down to the specific diets revealed by the skeletons, they are endlessly revealing sources.
And that brings us to a final thought, something really provocative for you, our listener, to consider focusing back on Herculaneum, the villa of the papyri.
Ah, yes, the library. Believed to contain the only ancient library to have survived largely intact from the classical world. Hundreds, potentially thousands, of scrolls buried within its unexcavated sections.
But reading them has been almost impossible, right?
For centuries, yes. The problem was the ink. Ancient ink was typically carbon-based, essentially soot mixed with water or gum. When the papyrus scrolls themselves were carbonized by the heat, you ended up with carbon ink on carbonized papyrus.
Making it invisible to normal imaging, even X-rays.
Exactly. X-rays pass right through both, similarly. For decades, it seemed like a scientific dead end. Attempts to physically unroll the brittle, charred scrolls often destroyed them. Many thought the texts were lost forever.
But technology has moved on.
Dramatically. Recently, using sophisticated techniques involving particle accelerators, high-resolution CT scanning, and crucially, artificial intelligence trained to detect subtle differences in surface texture or density where the ink was applied, researchers have started to read inside the rolled-up carbonized scrolls without physically opening them.
AI is reading the scrolls.
Yes. The Vesuvius Challenge and international competition spurred huge progress. In early 2024, teams successfully used AI to decipher hundreds of words, entire passages from one of the scrolls, revealing parts of a previously unknown philosophical work discussing pleasure. It was a massive breakthrough.
Wow. So, considering the sheer volume of scrolls known to be in the villa, many still completely buried and unexcavated, what comes next?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? If this AI-driven technology can be refined and applied to the hundreds, maybe thousands of scrolls still waiting in the villa of the papyri, what monumental lost knowledge might we unlock?
Lost plays, histories, scientific treatises, philosophical dialogues we only know by name.
Potentially all of that and more. Could we recover lost works by Aristotle, Sappho, Epicurus? Entire fields of ancient thought, known only through fragments. The secrets of the ancient world, locked away by Vesuvius's fire nearly 2,000 years ago, might finally be readable, not through picks and shovels, but through pixels and algorithms. What will they tell us? Imagine a society where the adults gather, like twice a month, and they drink 89 proof rum.
And we are not talking about a casual cocktail here.
No, definitely not. We're talking about drinking until they literally pass out. For days at a time.
Right. Which is just wild to think about.
Yeah, because by Western standards, you'd look at this behavior and immediately declare an absolute devastating epidemic of alcoholism.
Oh, absolutely. You'd expect total societal collapse.
Right. But what if I told you that in this specific culture, the concept of addiction literally does not exist?
That's fascinating.
There's no social dysfunction, no isolation, no health crises that are usually associated with that level of heavy drinking. So today on this deep dive, we are unpacking the vast and honestly incredibly complex machinery of addiction.
It really is complex, and it completely shatters the conventional narratives we're so used to hearing. I mean, when we look at the latest scientific, sociological, and psychological research, we have to completely throw out the idea that addiction is just, a moral failing or a simple lack of willpower.
Yeah, it's far more intricate than that.
Exactly. It's not just a bad habit.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to make sense of a society that can binge drink without addiction, or to understand why a teenager gets hooked on a smartphone game, we have to completely reframe what addiction actually is.
Let's do.
The materials we're exploring today describe it as a profound neuropsychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
We're talking about the physical synapses in your brain being reshaped in ways that are, well, they're strikingly similar to what happens when you fall deeply in love.
Or even when you taste an incredibly delicious meal, right?
And to truly understand how that happens, we have to look at addiction as a biopsychosocial disorder.
I know that sounds like a massive clinical mouthful, but it simply means that addiction sits at the messy intersection of our biology, specifically the brain's reward system, our individual psychology, and our social environment.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, you really cannot separate the biological molecule from the cultural environment. They feed right into each other.
Right. But before we can even begin to understand how culture or environment plays into this,
Right.
we need to understand exactly what is happening inside the brain on a microscopic level.
The actual mechanics of it.
Exactly. And the research points to a very specific circuit in the brain called the mesocorticolimbic pathway.
Yeah, so think of the mesocorticolimbic pathway as the brain's ultimate tally counter for pleasure and survival.
Okay.
It connects a region deep in your brain that releases dopamine to the nucleus accumbens and then all the way up to the prefrontal cortex. Now, people often think dopamine is just the pleasure chemical.
Right, like it's just pure euphoria.
Exactly. But it's really a learning and motivation signal.
Yeah.
When you do something essential for survival, like eating calorie-dense food or having a positive social interaction, your brain releases a spike of dopamine.
It's your brain's way of saying, like, that was good, remember exactly how you did that and do it again.
Spot on. But drugs of abuse completely hijack that natural tally counter. They flood that pathway with unnaturally massive, prolonged surges of dopamine.
And this is where we get to a microscopic culprit that absolutely blew my mind. There's a specific protein, a gene transcription factor called FOSB.
Yes, delta FOSB. And what is so fascinating here is that FOSB is basically a common denominator in the development of virtually all forms of addiction.
Wait, all forms?
Virtually all of them, yeah. When you are chronically exposed to an addictive stimulus, whether that's a chemical substance or even a behavior, this protein slowly begins to accumulate in the neurons of the nucleus accumbens.
So it builds up over time.
It does, and it literally goes in and alters your gene expression. It changes the physical architecture of your brain's reward center.
Wow. And it doesn't just wash out of your system after a good night's sleep, does it?
Mm-hmm.
The research highlights that while most proteins in the brain come and go pretty quickly, FOSB is incredibly stubborn.
Oh, it is exceptionally stable. It persists in those neurons for like 1 to 2 months, even after a person completely stops using the substance.
1 to 2 months.
Yeah, even with total abstinence.
Think of FOSB like a molecular light switch that gets jammed in the on position. Like you've left the room, you've locked the door, you have stopped the behavior entirely. But the lights are still glaring for months, screaming at your brain to seek out that reward.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Because it stays there, it acts as a long-lasting biological memory. And as it accumulates, it actually represses other genes in the brain to ensure that even more FOSB can build up.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. And this accumulation directly drives a phenomenon that researchers call reward sensitization.
Let's clarify that for the listener, because it's so easy to confuse sensitization with tolerance.
Right. They aren't the same thing.
Yeah, tolerance is a concept most of us know. Like, you drink a cup of coffee every day, and eventually you need 2 cups to feel the same buzz. But sensitization is doing something entirely different to the brain.
It's a totally different mechanism. Reward sensitization is a pathological increase in what scientists term incentive salience.
Okay, incentive salience.
Yeah, which in plain English just means the wanting or craving for a reward. So over time, because of tolerance, a person might actually experience much less actual pleasureless liking from the drug.
So they don't even enjoy it as much.
Right. But because of the sensitization driven by FOSB, their craving, their desperate wanting of the drug and anything associated with it just skyrockets.
You don't even like the feeling anymore, but the compulsion to seek it out is stronger than ever.
Exactly.
Which brings up a huge question for me. If this hijacked wanting system happens with chemical drugs, what happens when we do naturally rewarding things? Like, can those natural dopamine spikes turn into the same kind of trap?
They absolutely can. And that bridges us right into behavioral addictions. The exact same biological pathways, complete with that stubborn buildup of FOSB, can be co-opted by everyday activities without a single drop of a chemical substance involved.
So things like scrolling on your phone, playing video games, shopping.
Exactly. Sexual behavior, gambling, gaming, they all activate this identical mesolimbic pathway.
That's wild.
And the medical community has formally caught up to this reality too. The DSM-5, which is, the primary manual for psychiatric diagnoses, now officially recognizes gambling as a severe behavioral addiction.
Right.
And the World Health Organization's ICD-11 recently recognized gaming addiction. Preclinical evidence shows that repetitive, extreme exposure to these natural rewards induces the exact same neuroplasticity as a drug addiction.
And the data dives heavily into something that I think will resonate with a lot of people listening. Food addiction.
Yes, that's a big one.
The research explains that highly palatable foods things engineered to be high in fat, salt, and sugar, like a decadent chocolate cake or fast food trigger, the brain's reward system so violently that they can actually override the body's natural hormones that tell you when you're full.
They completely bypass your natural satiety signals. You develop a tolerance to the dopamine hit of the food, so you have to eat more of it to get that same feeling of comfort or reward, even as the food becomes less physically satisfying. To measure this, researchers at Yale developed the Yale Food Addiction Scale, or the YFAS. It's a questionnaire designed to assess signs of food addiction using the exact same diagnostic criteria used for substance use disorders.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate and push back here for a second. We all need to eat to survive.
Sure.
And many of us look forward to a great piece of chocolate cake at the end of a long week. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I love sugar, am I addicted? At what point does just really loving a dessert cross the line into a clinical pathology according to these scales?
That is the vital distinction to make. According to the YFAS, a potential food addiction diagnosis is predicted not just by how much you like the food.
Okay.
It requires the presence of multiple substance-related disorder criteria combined with a significant impairment to your daily life.
So it's about the collateral damage.
Precisely. It is the loss of control. It's continuing the behavior despite clear negative consequences, despite it actively harming your physical health, ruining your social life, or causing severe psychological distress.
Right, it's no longer just a treat.
Exactly. It's when the drive to consume becomes a compulsion that overrides your cognitive control, rather than just a source of enjoyment.
So it's that invisible line where the reward circuitry basically takes the steering wheel away from your rational brain.
Yes.
But this leads to an obvious puzzle. If we all experience natural rewards, and we all get these dopamine spikes from a great meal or winning a game, why do only some people develop an addiction?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, two people can experiment with the exact same behavior and only one gets hooked. What is the invisible tiebreaker?
Well, that brings us to the vulnerability factor. Why is one brain more susceptible than another? To answer that, we have to look at a combination of age, genetics, and epigenetics.
Let's start with age, because the statistics here are pretty sobering. Over 90% of those with an addiction began using substances or engaging in the addictive behavior before the age of 18. Why is that window so critical?
It basically comes down to an adolescent brain mismatch. During our teenage years, the limbic reward circuits, the older parts of the brain that seek out pleasure, novelty, and peer approval mature well before the prefrontal cortex is fully developed.
So it's like installing a Ferrari engine inside a golf cart.
That is a terrifyingly accurate analogy.
The capacity for speed and intense reward is massive, but the steering wheel and the braking systems just haven't been built yet.
That is exactly what's happening biologically. The prefrontal cortex is the cognitive control center. It's the brain's brakes. Because of this developmental mismatch, the incentive reward system is granted disproportionate power over decision-making.
So they just can't say no as easily.
Right. It makes teenagers incredibly vulnerable to experimentation. And unfortunately, exposing the brain to massive dopamine surges during this early malleable period can disrupt how synapses are pruned.
Wow.
Yeah, it causes permanent alterations in how that brain processes rewards for the rest of their life.
That is heavy. And then there's the family tree, the genetic factors.
Yeah.
The research notes that genetics account for, like, 40 to 60% of the risk for severe substance disorders like alcoholism. But genetics isn't just about the DNA sequence you're born with, right? It's not a fixed destiny. It's also about how those genes are expressed.
Exactly, and this is the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how environmental influences can change how your genes are read without altering the underlying DNA sequence itself.
Okay, so how does that work?
Think of your DNA as an enormous instruction manual. Epigenetics is like a highlighter pen that comes in and marks certain paragraphs to be read more often while completely crossing out other
Oh, I
paragraphs.
see.
Yeah, and chronic drug use or extreme environmental stress can cause these epigenetic changes, physically altering the reward signaling pathways.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. There is an animal study detailed in the research on transgenerational epigenetic inheritance that it stopped me in my tracks.
It is a groundbreaking study. Researchers took male rats and exposed them to cocaine. Now, as a result of this exposure, these specific rats developed epigenetic alterations, specifically an increased expression of a gene called BDNF in their prefrontal cortex.
Okay, and what did that do?
What this did, remarkably, was blunt the rewarding properties of the cocaine.
Wait, so the exposure essentially triggered an internal biological defense mechanism. It made them want the drug less.
Exactly.
Wow.
But the truly profound part of the study wasn't just what happened to those fathers. It was that they passed this exact epigenetic alteration onto their male offspring.
You're kidding.
No. The fathers transmitted an epigenetic resistance to cocaine addiction to a generation that hadn't even been born yet.
Wait, hold on. Just thinking about the gravity of that. The father's drug use didn't just hurt him, it literally built a biological shield inside his son.
That's what the data shows.
That completely rewrites how we think about generational trauma and biology. But it also raises a massive question for me. If our environment, or our parents' environment, can alter our gene expression that profoundly, what role does a stressful society play in triggering these vulnerabilities?
That is the crucial pivot we have to make here. The brain disease model we've been discussing focuses heavily on biology, but the environmental canvas dictates whether those biological vulnerabilities are ever triggered in the first place.
Right.
Chronic stress, adverse childhood experiences, systemic poverty, these environments profoundly dysregulate the nervous system. They drastically increase the motivational value of any substance or behavior that can temporarily reduce those negative feelings.
Which pulls the camera all the way back from the microscopic molecule to the macroscopic society. There's a framework the researchers call the critical medical anthropology model.
Yes.
It argues that we shouldn't just look at addiction as a brain disease, but as a form of self-medication against the social production of suffering.
Exactly.
It points to political disparity, institutional power, and marginalization as the root causes of the psychological trauma that people are desperately trying to soothe.
We see this vividly illustrated in what anthropologists call the subcultural model. There was an incredible ethnographic study from 1969 by Edward Preble and John J. Casey.
Oh, the New York study.
Yes. They spent time documenting street-based intravenous heroin users in New York City. And what they found challenged the dominant narrative of the time, which viewed these individuals merely as immoral dropouts trying to escape reality.
Right. The researchers found the exact opposite. For these heavily marginalized individuals, the intense daily hustle surrounding their drug use actually provided a highly structured social connection.
It did.
It gave them a symbolic meaning and a socially constructed purpose that felt completely unattainable to them in conventional mainstream society.
The drug subculture, ironically, provided a community and a sense of identity where society had offered them none.
It provided a place to belong, which is heartbreaking, but it makes total mechanical sense when you look at humans as deeply social creatures.
Absolutely.
But this leads perfectly back to the scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive, the society that drinks heavily without addiction.
Yes, you are referring to the work of anthropologist Dwight Heath. He developed the cultural model based on his extensive field work in the 1950s with the Kamba people of Bolivia.
So what exactly did he observe there? Because it sounds completely counterintuitive to everything we know about alcohol.
Heath observed that adult members of the Kamba Society drank massive quantities of an 89-proof rum during their social festivals.
Right.
They would drink to the point of severe intoxication, often passing out for several days at a time, at least twice a month.
So what does this all mean? By our standards, their biological reward centers are being absolutely flooded with dopamine and FOSB.
Undeniably.
But Heath observed that they had no concept of alcoholism. More importantly, they showed absolutely none of the aggression, the social isolation, or the cascading health crises that we associate with that level of drinking.
None of it.
Are you saying that without the cultural stigma or the extreme social isolation that usually accompanies addiction in the West, the disease itself doesn't manifest the same way?
It forces us to heavily consider that conclusion. Heath's findings propose that the severe problems associated with heavy substance use are largely determined by cultural beliefs and social context.
Wow.
For the Kamba, this habitual heavy consumption was not an isolated, shameful act. It was a highly valued communal ritual that actively enforced their social bonds. There was no marginalization attached to it.
That changes everything.
Right. Now, this doesn't erase the biology of Fuzz B, but it forcefully reminds us that the psychosocial environment can entirely dictate the consequences and the human experience of the behavior.
It's the biopsychosocial model perfectly illustrated. The molecule matters, but the culture decides how the molecule expresses itself. And understanding that delicate interplay between the microscopic biology and the macroscopic social elements is exactly what is driving modern innovations in treatment. Because if you know how the machine works on every level, you can intervene on every level.
And the recent medical advancements we are seeing are nothing short of revolutionary. We're moving far beyond just talk therapy and into highly targeted biological interventions. For instance, the development of addiction vaccines.
Vaccines. Like we used to train the body to fight off the flu, but for a drug. How on earth does the immune system fight a chemical?
The mechanism is brilliant. The theory is to train the immune system to recognize and attack drug molecules before they can ever reach the brain.
Okay, how?
Well, for example, there's a vaccine in clinical trials called TACD for cocaine. It works by combining a cocaine derivative with a harmless, inactivated cholera toxin.
Oh.
This large combined molecule stimulates the patient's immune system to produce targeted antibodies. If the person then uses cocaine, these newly minted antibodies immediately bind to the cocaine molecules right in the bloodstream.
And because they are bound together, the molecule becomes physically too large to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Exactly. It intercepts the drug. The drug never reaches the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine release never happens, and the euphoric high is completely negated.
That is wild.
There is also a similar one called NicVX for nicotine. Now, these vaccines do not instantly stop the psychological desire for the drug, but they physically break the biological reward cycle, giving the person a crucial window to recover.
And beyond vaccines, there is a massive breakthrough discussed in the literature involving GLP-1 agonists. If you follow health news, these are the medications currently sweeping the world for diabetes and weight management drugs, like semaglutide, which most people know as Ozempic.
Yeah, they've become culturally ubiquitous for weight loss, but their potential for treating addiction is staggering. A recent massive study in the journal Addiction analyzed the health records of over 1.3 million individuals.
And what did they find regarding substance use for the people on these weight loss drugs?
They found that individuals actively using Ozempic or similar GLP-1 medications had a 40% lower risk of an opioid overdose and a 50% lower risk of severe alcohol intoxication compared to those not using the drugs.
Wait, how is a stomach medication doing that to opioid and alcohol cravings?
Because it's not just a stomach medication. GLP-1 receptors don't just exist in the gut. They exist in the brain's reward centers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. These medications effectively quiet the food noise in the brain that drives compulsive eating, and researchers are realizing that the exact same biological volume knob that controls food noise also controls drink noise and drug noise.
That makes so much sense.
By dampening the hypersensitized reward pathways, these drugs seem to dramatically reduce the compulsion to consume across the board.
That is incredible. A pill that could potentially lower the volume on that jammed Husby light switch.
Right.
But, as we've established today, fixing the biology is only half the battle. If someone is self-medicating for severe trauma or social isolation, you can't just prescribe a pill and send them back into a broken environment.
No, you absolutely cannot.
You have to heal the psyche, too. And the research highlights some fascinating ways art is being used to do exactly that, not just as a therapeutic hobby, but as a serious clinical assessment tool.
Yes, like the Formal Elements Art Therapy Scale, or FEATS. Clinicians use it to evaluate drawings created by individuals struggling with substance use disorders.
Yeah, so they analyze the art itself.
Exactly. Rather than just asking a patient how they feel, which can be incredibly difficult for someone processing trauma, the clinician looks at the structural elements of their artwork. They look at the realism of the human features drawn, the overall complexity of the image, and the developmental age reflected in the drawing style.
It allows healthcare providers to chronify these abstract, visceral emotions that the patient simply doesn't have the words for yet.
Yes.
There's also an assessment called the bird's nest drawing.
Oh, that is a particularly insightful tool. The therapist asks the client to draw a bird's nest. Subconsciously, the nest represents the home and the family dynamic.
That's beautiful.
And the therapist analyzes the drawing to visualize the client's attachment security. For instance, the amount of color used can indicate how secure or insecure they feel in their interpersonal relationships. A stark lack of color or a chaotic structure often points to an insecure attachment style.
And knowing that attachment style is a massive piece of the puzzle for a therapist trying to build a stable recovery framework for that specific person.
It's crucial.
But beyond the clinical assessments, art is being used powerfully to fight the social stigma we talked about earlier. The dossier mentions a project at Temple University and another grassroots initiative called Voice, where women with histories of severe addiction created art to document their lives.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the goal of these advocacy projects is to put a profoundly human face on a condition that is too often reduced to statistics.
Oh.
By showcasing the emotional depth and humanity of these individuals, the art helps shift public perception. It forces society to stop viewing addiction as a moral failing of bad people and to start viewing it as a chronic, highly complex medical condition that requires empathy and structural support.
Because treating addiction truly requires this multi-pronged approach. You need the biological interventions, like the potential vaccines or the GLP-1 medications, to quiet the physical cravings and give the brain a chance to breathe.
Right.
But you absolutely must combine them with psychosocial healing through therapy, art, and ultimately rebuilding a sense of community connection.
It is the only way to treat a biopsychosocial disorder. You treat the biology, the psychology, and the society.
It's been an incredible journey we've taken today. From the stubborn, invisible persistence of that jammed molecular switch, FOSB, lurking in our neurons.
To the protective epigenetic armor passed down by those rat fathers.
Yeah, that was wild. And to the stark realization that human connection and culture, like with the Kamba people, can completely dictate how a vulnerability manifests. And finally, the wild promise of immune vaccines and volume-lowering medications.
It is a powerful reminder that human behavior is never a simple binary of good choices versus bad choices. It is deeply complex, beautifully intricate, and intensely vulnerable to the world around us.
It really is. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final fascinating thought from the research that we haven't touched on yet. It's about the origin of the word itself. The word addiction comes from the ancient Latin root addico.
This is a perfect place to end because that Latin root has a very revealing dual meaning.
It does. In ancient Roman law, addico meant being enslaved to a creditor, literally giving up your freedom and your body to pay a massive debt.
Which is a bleak but perfect description of the loss of control we've discussed today.
Right, but the word also meant devotion. It meant dedicating yourself entirely, giving yourself over to something profoundly good.
That's amazing.
It was only much later, during the temperance movements of the 19th century, that society stripped away the second meaning and narrowed the definition solely to disease and enslavement.
It forces us to look at the underlying machinery we've been discussing in a totally different light.
Exactly. We started this deep dive talking about how the brain's synapses reshape during addiction in ways that are strikingly similar to falling in love.
We did.
So we leave you to ponder this. Is it possible that the incredibly powerful machinery of addiction is actually just our beautiful, natural human capacity for deep devotion? Is it a feature of our biology, not a bug, that has tragically been captured by the wrong stimuli in a modern, isolating world?
It is a profound reframing of the human condition.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself wanting something a little too much. Until next time, keep digging deep.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We have a massive stack of research on the desk today, articles, biographies, old maps, and honestly, digging through this, it felt a bit like reading a mystery novel.
Oh, absolutely.
Where the main character is like hiding in plain sight.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's a story about a missing person, in a way.
Yeah.
But a missing person who left his fingerprints on, well, absolutely everything.
Exactly. So I want to start with a little quiz for you and for everyone listening.
Okay.
If I were to ask you to name the most famous, the most celebrated, the rock star status scientist of the 19th century, the guy who was basically the Einstein and the David Attenborough of his day all rolled into one, who do you picture?
Most people, I think, if they know their history, they go straight to Charles Darwin.
Right. Darwin is the big one. Or maybe you think of, I don't know, Tesla or Edison if you go a bit later. But here's the thing. If you look at a map, literally any map of the world, or a biology textbook, or even a star chart, there is one name that appears more than almost anyone else's.
It is genuinely everywhere. I mean, we are talking about a ubiquity that is hard to even comprehend today.
We did a count. We have the Humboldt current off South America, the Humboldt penguin, the Humboldt squid.
Which is a terrifying creature, by the way.
A nightmare creature. Yeah. Huge and aggressive.
Basidius gigas.
Yeah. We found counties named Humboldt in California, Nevada, Iowa. There's a Humboldt River, a Humboldt Peak, a Humboldt Glacier. There's a town in Saskatchewan.
And there's even a Mare Humboldtanum, a sea on the moon.
A sea on the moon. And yet if you stopped someone on the street today and asked who was Alexander von Humboldt, you'd probably just get a blank stare.
Yeah, maybe they think he was, what, a brand of cheese? Or some kind of bread?
Which is wild, because in his day, he was arguably the most famous man in the world after Napoleon Bonaparte.
I mean, contemporary sources called him the Shakespeare of sciences. That's a heavy title to carry.
It's a very apt title, though, and I think the reason we struggle to place him today is that we don't really have polymaths like that anymore. We're so used to specialists.
We are. But Humboldt wasn't just a specialist in one thing. He was a geographer, a naturalist, an explorer, a mine inspector, a diplomat, and really the man who gave us the concept of ecology.
So that is our mission today. We are going to dust off the history books and, resurrect the man behind the penguins and the squids. We're going to unpack the life of Friedrich Wilhelm Heinrich Alexander von Humboldt.
It's quite a name.
It is a lot of name for a man who did a lot of living. We're going to look at why people like Charles Darwin,
who absolutely worshipped him,
said he wouldn't have even boarded the Beagle without reading Humboldt, why they called him the greatest scientific traveler who ever lived. And we're going to dig into his big idea. It sounds so simple to us now, but at the time, it was revolutionary. The unity of nature.
That's the core of it right there. The idea that the world isn't just a bunch of separate lists of, bugs and rocks and weather patterns, but one giant living, breathing, interacting web.
So let's rewind the clock. We're back in the late 1700s. Who is this guy? Where does he come from? Because you don't just wake up one day and decide to map the entire South American continent without some serious backstory.
No, you definitely don't. You need a very specific set of circumstances for that. And Humboldt had them. Alexander von Humboldt was born in Berlin, Prussia, on September 14th, 1769.
Right in the thick of the Enlightenment.
Exactly. A time when reason and science were starting to challenge all the old dogmas.
And he wasn't exactly a scrappy underdog, right? He didn't start from the bottom.
Not at all. He was born into a very prominent, very noble family. His father was a major in the Prussian army and a royal chamberlain. The future king of Prussia was actually Alexander's godfather.
So born with a platinum spoon in his mouth.
Absolutely. But it wasn't exactly a warm and fuzzy childhood. His father died when Alexander was only 9.
Oh, wow.
Which left him and his older brother Wilhelm in the care of their mother, Maria Elizabeth.
And from the biographies in our stack, she sounds, well, intense. Seems like an understatement.
That is putting it mildly. She was described as emotionally distant, very cold. She was a woman who was incredibly ambitious for her sons, but not in a, follow your dreams kind of way.
Right.
She wanted them to be high-ranking civil servants for the Prussian state. So she hired the absolute best tutors, leading Enlightenment thinkers to educate them at home.
And this is where we see that classic dynamic between the two brothers. It's almost like a movie script. You have Wilhelm, the older one.
Wilhelm was the golden child. Brilliant, bookish, very academic. He loved languages, philosophy, ancient Greek.
Boop, boop. The model student.
The one who could sit still.
And then there's Alexander.
The problem child.
He was restless. The tutors actually worried he wasn't very smart because he just couldn't sit still. He had this frantic, nervous energy. As a kid, he wasn't interested in Greek verbs. He was obsessed with the outside world.
Just running around the estate, collecting plants, shells, insects.
Right. His family even had a nickname for him.
The Little Apothecary.
The Little Apothecary. Which is adorable, but you get the sense his mom wasn't a fan. She didn't want a bug collector. She wanted a bureaucrat.
Exactly. In her mind, that was a hobby, a distraction, not a career. So she steered him aggressively toward finance and administration. He actually studied finance at university to please her. And then, for a serious career, He went to the Freiburg School of Mines in 1791.
Now, I have to pause here, because
Mhm.
usually this is the part of the story where the creative genius gets crushed by the corporate machine. He gets stuck in a mine shaft and hates his life, but that is not what happened.
No, and this is what makes Humboldt so interesting. He didn't sulk. He didn't rebel by failing. He went to the School of Mines, and he absolutely crushed it.
Crushed it how?
He finished a 3-year degree in 8 months.
8 months. That's
He
insane.
was a machine. She'd wake up at 5 a.m., go down into the mines, study the rocks, come up, study the plants on the rocks, and then spend the night reading about economics. He became a mine inspector at 22.
And he wasn't just some pencil pusher.
No, he was constantly in the field, traveling between different mines, and he was incredibly effective. In his first year, he completely reorganized the operations and increased gold production, outstripping the previous 8 years combined.
So he's a brilliant capitalist manager. But he wasn't just about the profits. This is where we see that human side of him early on, which becomes so important later.
That's a great point.
Yep.
He saw the conditions the miners were working in, and he was appalled. You have to remember, mining in the 1790s was brutal, dangerous work.
So what did he do?
He used his own money, not the state's, his own inheritance, to open a free school for the miners. He wanted them to be educated, to understand the geology they were working with.
And he was inventing safety gear, too.
Right. He invented a breathing mask to help with the noxious gases and a specialized lamp that wouldn't explode in the tunnels.
It just shows his practical genius. He's not just a theorist, he's an engineer and a humanitarian. But even while he was being the world's best mine inspector, he had this other life.
He never slept. That's the only explanation. This is the period where he becomes friends with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
The Goethe, like Faust Goethe.
The very same. Goethe was older, already famous, but he and Humboldt became like scientific soulmates. They were both fascinated by this idea of a life force.
And the big thing at the time was galvanism, right?
Yes, electricity in muscles. Luigi Galvani had discovered that if you shocked a dead frog's leg, it would kick. And this blew people's minds. It suggested that electricity and life might be the same thing.
It's straight out of Frankenstein.
It really is. In fact, Mary Shelley knew about these experiments. Humboldt and Goethe would spend hours hooking up frog legs to different metals to see them twitch.
And Humboldt took it a step further. He wasn't just using batteries.
No. He found that sometimes the metal alone wasn't enough. But, and this is the creepy cool detail, he found that the moisture from his own breath could complete the circuit.
Wait, what?
He literally thought he was breathing life into the frog leg. He described it as one of his favorite experiments. It felt like he was imparting his own vitality to this dead tissue. It really highlights that romantic era blend of hard science and almost mystical wonder.
So he's a mining genius, he's zapping frog legs, hanging out with Goethe, but he's still stuck in Prussia working for the government. What sets him loose?
The catalyst is tragic, but for him, liberating. His mother passes away in 1796.
And I don't want to sound callous, but based on the reading, for Alexander, this was basically his get-out-of-jail-free card.
It was. He had spent his whole life trying to please her. Now she was gone, and she left him a massive fortune.
So he had the money to self-fund his dreams.
And he quit his job immediately. He told his friends he was done with the madhouse of the civil service. He was ready to travel.
But it wasn't that easy. You couldn't just book a flight in 1796.
No, the geopolitics were a nightmare. The Napoleonic Wars were raging. Europe was in chaos. It was actually dangerous to travel.
He had a few false starts, didn't he?
Several. He tried to join a French expedition, but it was postponed. He tried to go to Egypt with Napoleon scientists, but that fell through. He was all dressed up with nowhere to go.
So he ends up in Madrid, and this is where luck, or maybe destiny, steps in.
He meets King Carlos I of Spain. Now, you have to understand, the Spanish colonies in the Americas, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, were locked down tight. They didn't like foreigners poking around.
Spying on their gold mine?
Exactly. It was a closed system. But Humboldt manages to charm the king.
How? What was his pitch?
Well, it was the era of the Bourbon reforms. The Spanish crown was trying to modernize, to figure out what resources they actually had.
And here comes Humboldt.
Right. He walks in and says, look, I am a Prussian nobleman. I have my own money, and I happen to be the best mining inspector in Europe. Let me survey your empire. I'll give you all the data, and I'll do it for free.
He essentially got a blank check.
Better than a check. He got a royal passport that gave him access to everything. Viceroys were ordered to help him. It was unprecedented. So in 1799, he set sail with his companion, the French botanist Aimé Bonpland.
And this begins the Great American Expedition, 5 years that would change science forever.
They landed in Cumana, Venezuela, and you have to imagine the scene. He was absolutely overwhelmed.
He talked about leaves within leaves, right? Just total sensory overload.
Exactly. He said he was running around like a crazy person. He wanted to look at everything at once. The plants, the animals, even the stars were different. He saw the Southern Cross for the first time.
And because he's Humboldt, he doesn't just look, he starts measuring. But before we get to the measuring, we have to talk about the electric eels.
Oh, we have to.
Because this story it's just intense.
It is a high-energy story, literally. They were deep in the Orinoco Basin. Humboldt had heard rumors about these gymnotus eels that could kill a man with an invisible blow.
Which, to a guy interested in animal electricity, is the holy grail.
He needed to study them. But these things are dangerous. They can deliver a shock of up to 600 volts.
So he asks the locals to help. And they have a unique solution.
They did. The locals suggested a technique called fishing with horses.
Fishing with horses. Just let that phrase sink in for a second.
They rounded up about 30 wild horses and mules and just drove them into the muddy pond where the eels lived.
What? Just force them into the pond to be bait?
Essentially, the thrashing provoked the eels, and these 5-foot-long snake-like creatures jumped out and attacked the horses, pressing against their bellies, discharging their electricity.
That sounds horrific.
It was. The horses were panicking, screaming. Humboldt wrote that some of them actually drowned because they were stunned by the shocks.
But the point was to drain the batteries, right?
Exactly. The eels can't shock forever. They run out of energy. Once they were exhausted, they were safe to catch.
Safe being a relative term.
Very relative. He and Bonpland still got shocked dissecting them. Humboldt said he felt sick for the rest of the day. But this wasn't just a stunt. This experience made him think deeply about electricity as a universal force of nature, connecting it back to his frog legs.
It's that willingness to put his own body on the line for data.
It defines his style. Fearless. Or maybe just obsessed.
So, they survived the eels. They continued deep into the rainforest, looking for the Cassiquiare Canal. Why was this such a big deal?
Right. At the time, geographers in Europe debated if it was even possible for a river to split and flow into two different basins. But there were rumors of a natural canal connecting the Orinoco River system and the Amazon River system.
Which would mean you could travel by boat from Venezuela all the way to Brazil without touching the ocean.
A superhighway of the interior. And Humboldt decided to go verify it himself.
And this wasn't a leisure cruise.
It was a brutal journey. 1,725 miles of wild country. They were in a narrow canoe for months.
Mosquito.
Clouds of them. Humboldt wrote that they had to bury themselves in sand or cover their faces with rags just to sleep. They caught fevers. Their food rotted.
But they found it.
They did. They located the Cassiquiare, took the measurements, and proved the two massive river systems were linked. It was another piece of his puzzle. Everything is connected.
But the crowning achievement of the trip, at least visually and intellectually, was in the Andes, specifically Mount Chimborazo.
This is the iconic moment. In 1802, Chimborazo was thought to be the highest mountain in the world.
Wait, really? What about Everest?
The Himalayas hadn't been fully surveyed by Europeans yet, so as far as Western science knew, this was the roof of the world. And Humboldt decided to climb it.
In 1802, no North Face jackets, no oxygen tanks.
No, they're wearing wool coats and velvet trousers, climbing a glaciated volcano.
It sounds like a suicide mission.
It nearly was. They were climbing with bleeding gums from the altitude, dizzy, vomiting, struggling to breathe.
But they kept going.
They made it to 19,286 feet.
A world record for a Westerner at the time.
And it stood for decades. They didn't quite reach the summit. They hit an impassable ravine, but they got higher than anyone else had.
And it's standing there on the side of this volcano, gasping for air, that he has his aha moment.
This is the moment that changes biology. He looks out, and he doesn't just see a mountain. He sees a system. He visualizes what he called the Natuurgemäld.
The painting of nature. Can you break that down?
He noticed that plants were arranged in zones, like layers of a cake. At the base, in the tropical heat, you have palms. As you go up, the climate gets cooler and the plants change. You get oaks, then alpine plants, then lichens, then just snow.
So altitude mimics latitude.
Precisely. Climbing the mountain was like traveling from the equator to the poles in miniature. He realized that nature is organized by climate.
This sounds obvious to us now. We learn about biomes in elementary school.
But at the time, this was revolutionary. Before Humboldt, scientists just classified things. Here's a plant. It has 5 leaves. Put it in a box.
He added the where and the why to the what.
Exactly. It was the birth of biogeography. He linked biology to geology and meteorology. He saw the unity.
And he created this incredible illustration, the Naturgemeld. It's basically a cross-section of the mountain with all the plant names written at the exact altitudes where they live.
It's astonishing. It's an infographic from 1807. And on the sides, he listed the temperature, the gravity, the blueness of the sky, the humidity. A pioneer of data visualization.
Speaking of data, we have to talk about how he collected it. The man was a walking laboratory.
He was obsessed with measurement. He called it his armory of science. He carried the finest instruments available, packed in those velvet-lined boxes, barometers, thermometers, hygrometers.
And he lugged all this up a mountain.
He and Bonpland did. They were constantly stopping to set up tripods and take readings. He even measured the blueness of the sky.
How do you measure blueness?
He had a device called a cyanometer. It was a card with different shades of blue. He'd hold it up to quantify the color intensity.
He was quantifying the unquantifiable.
He measured everything. The temperature of the ocean, which is how he mapped the cold current off Peru that now bears his name, the Humboldt current.
And speaking of maps, he invented something we see every single day on the weather report.
Isotherms, yes. This is a huge contribution. Before Humboldt, climate data was just a list of numbers. He had the idea to draw lines connecting places on a map that had the same average temperature.
Those wavy lines.
Those wavy lines. Suddenly, you could see global climate patterns. He made climate visible.
It's another example of him seeing that web. But his observations weren't just about pristine nature. He was also looking at how humans impacted it.
This is fascinating and honestly a bit depressing because he warned us 200 years ago. When he was in Venezuela, near Lake Valencia, he noticed the water levels were dropping rapidly.
And he didn't just say, oh, it must be a dry season.
No, he looked at the land use. He realized the farmers had cut down the surrounding forests for farmland.
And he connected the dots.
He identified the three crucial functions of forests: providing cooling shade, putting moisture back into the air through evaporation, and holding the soil and water like a sponge.
So he basically described the mechanics of human-induced climate change in 1800.
He did. He explicitly warned that destroying the forests would turn the land into a desert. He is widely considered the father of environmentalism for this.
It's incredible foresight. And he didn't stop at environmental critique. He was also a sharp social critic.
Yes, very sharp. After South America, he spent a year in New Spain, modern Mexico. He was very critical of the colonial system. He got access to all the colonial records.
And published the political essay on the Kingdom of New Spain.
A bestseller. But what's really interesting is his stance on slavery and the treatment of indigenous people. Humboldt was a vocal abolitionist.
Not just a polite disagreement.
No, he was vehement. He called slavery the greatest of all the evils which have afflicted humanity.
Yeah.
He also argued that it was scientifically wrong.
Has
He wrote that there are no superior or inferior races, only different cultures. He explicitly stated all humans are part of the same species with the same potential.
That was a radical view for a Prussian aristocrat in the early 1800s.
Very radical. He bucked the trend. He treated indigenous art and history with immense respect, not as artifacts from savages, but as a civilization.
So he finishes his tour of Latin America. He's got crates of plants, notebooks full of data, and he makes one important stop on the way back.
Yes, in 1804, the United States. He decides to stop in Philadelphia and D.C., and he writes a letter to President Thomas Jefferson.
And Jefferson, being a huge science geek,
Is thrilled. He invites Humboldt to the White House. You have to imagine these conversations.
the world's greatest traveler and the scholar
A
president.
total meeting of minds.
Uh-huh.
But it was also politically convenient. The U.S. had just made the Louisiana Purchase.
Right, but they didn't really know where the borders with Spanish Mexico were.
And here comes Humboldt, who has just spent a year mapping Mexico with a royal passport. He just hands over his maps and statistics to Jefferson.
He just gave him the intel.
He did. It was borderline espionage, but Humboldt believed knowledge should be free. He gave Jefferson a huge strategic advantage.
So Humboldt returns to Europe in 1804. He's been gone 5 years, and he returns as a hero.
Instantly famous, he goes to Paris and begins the monumental task of publishing his findings.
And we don't mean he wrote one paperback.
No, we mean he wrote a library. It took him over 20 years, about 30 volumes. The personal narrative, the botanical volumes, the zoology.
He was lavishly illustrated.
The best artists, the best paper. It was so expensive to produce, it actually exhausted his fortune. He spent every penny he had.
He went broke for science.
He essentially did. By the 1820s, he was running out of cash and had to move back to Berlin to take a job with the Prussian king just to pay the bills.
Which he hated.
He called Berlin a sandbox. He missed the intellectual stimulation of Paris.
But in 1829, at age 60, he gets one last chance for a big adventure.
The Russian Tsar invites him to survey the Russian Empire, to assess their mineral wealth.
The Russian expedition. But it sounds very different from the Amazon trip.
Oh, night and day. In the Amazon, he was eating ants. In Russia, he was a celebrity guest traveling in a convoy of carriages with servants and a cook.
It sounds luxurious, but he hated it.
He called it a golden cage. The Tsar didn't want him seeing the poverty or serfdom. He was forbidden from criticizing social conditions.
But he still managed to do serious science.
Oh, absolutely. He traveled over 9,000 miles in 6 months, all the way to the border of China.
And he made that crazy prediction about diamonds.
He did. Based on the geology of the Ural Mountains, he noticed it looked just like diamond districts in Brazil. He told the Russians, "You should find diamonds here."
And they were like, in freezing Russia, no way.
But he insisted. And a few days later, they found a diamond field. It proved his theories. Even at 60, the guy still got it.
He did. But his biggest work was still ahead of him. When he got back to Berlin, he decided to write one final book, a book that would contain everything.
Cosmos.
Cosmos.
He started writing it in his 70s. The goal was to unify all known science, from stars and nebulae down to the moss on a rock, including human history, into one coherent narrative.
The ultimate unity of nature manifesto.
And is a massive hit. The first volume sold out in 2 months. It was translated into almost every European language. It made science popular.
So let's talk about the man himself. We've talked about his work. What was he actually like?
Intense. He was known for talking. A lot.
A monologist.
Yeah. Darwin actually met him once and was disappointed because Humboldt talked for 3 hours straight and Darwin couldn't get a word in.
In his personal life, he never married.
He never married. His letters show he formed very intense emotional bonds with men throughout his life.
There was Reinhard von Haften, an army officer.
Yes, he wrote these passionate letters to him. And later, his valet, Seifert, who was with him for decades, Humboldt left his entire estate to Seifert.
And his sister-in-law had that famous quote.
Caroline von Humboldt. She said, "Nothing will ever have a great influence on Alexander that doesn't come through men."
It seems pretty clear.
It was part of who he was. And scholars speculate that his feeling like an outsider in rigid Prussian society might have fueled his drive to escape into exploration.
So he lives to be 89. He dies in 1859.
Which is such a poetic year to die, because it's the exact same year Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species.
It's like a passing of the torch.
It really was. Darwin was standing on Humboldt's shoulders.
But here's the big question we started with. If he was so famous, Shakespeare sciences, crowds blocking the streets, why did he fade away? Why isn't he a household name?
It's a tragedy of history, really. A few reasons. One is political. During World War I, there was a massive wave of anti-German sentiment in the U.S. and Britain.
The Liberty Cabbage era?
Exactly. Anything German was suspect. Humboldt's fame took a hit just because he was Prussian.
But there's a scientific reason, too.
Yes, and this is more profound. Science changed. Humboldt was a generalist who connected everything. But in the late 19th and 20th centuries, science became hyper-specialized. You became a zoologist or a geologist. You stayed in your lane.
And Humboldt was constantly swerving across every lane.
Exactly. His holistic approach started to look old-fashioned or romantic. He wrote about feelings and aesthetics alongside data that fell out of style.
But now, in the 21st century, it feels like we are swinging back.
That's the irony. With climate change, with ecology, we are realizing that Humboldt was right all along. You can't understand the tree without the soil and the rain and the human impact. We need that holistic view again.
So let's wrap this up. If you had to summarize Humboldt's greatest gift to us, what would it be?
It wasn't a single discovery. It was a worldview. He taught us that the Earth is a single, complex, living organism. He showed us that, and this is a quote, "In this great chain of causes and effects, no single fact can be considered in isolation."
That is a powerful thought. And it leads us to our provocative thought for the day. We live in an age of extreme data. We have more data than Humboldt could have ever dreamed of. Satellites, supercomputers. But do we have the cosmos?
Do we have the ability to see the unity in the chaos? That is the challenge. We have billions of pieces of the puzzle, but we often forget to look at the picture on the box.
So the next time you check the weather map and see those wavy isotherm lines, or you see a penguin at the zoo, think of the Prussian nobleman climbing a volcano in his velvet trousers, gasping for air, and seeing the whole world as one giant, beautiful painting.
A painting we are all a part of.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.